The call came at 11:40 on a Thursday night in March of 1992, and when I pushed open the door of that single-wide trailer at the end of a fire road in Fannin County, Georgia, I saw a woman named Connie Perry gripping a hand that did not belong to any person I had ever met or read about or imagined in 46 years of living. Her right fist was clenched around the iron rail of the bed frame. Her left hand was wrapped around fingers the size of bratwursts, covered in coarse dark hair connected to an arm thicker than my thigh, and she was bearing down through a contraction with her teeth clenched and her eyes shut, and she was not letting go. I delivered that baby. I delivered it with those fingers still laced between hers, with that arm extending from the far side of the bed to a shape seated on the floor that I could not look at directly for the first 20 minutes, because every time I tried, my hands started shaking too hard to be useful. I am a doctor. I needed my hands, so I kept my eyes on Connie, on the work, on the child coming into the world, and I let the rest of the room exist at the edge of my vision until the birth was done and the child was breathing, and I had no more excuses left to avoid what was sitting 3 feet from my elbow. My name is Frank Bell. I practiced family medicine in Fannin County, Georgia for 41 years, from 1974 until I closed my office in 2015. I am 79 years old. I have delivered somewhere around 2,000 babies in that time, most of them in the hospital over in Blue Ridge, but a good number of them in homes, in cabins, in the back seats of trucks on mountain roads where the nearest paved surface was 20 minutes behind us. Rural medicine in the North Georgia mountains is not what they teach you at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. They teach you anatomy, pharmacology, differential diagnosis, sterile field technique. They do not teach you how to set a compound fracture by the light of a truck's high beams, or how to talk a man with a chainsaw wound out of driving himself to the hospital because the ambulance will take too long, or how to deliver a child in a trailer while something that should not exist holds the mother's hand and watches you with eyes that carry more understanding than half the humans you have treated in your career. I need to tell this story from the beginning because the night I walked into that trailer was not the beginning. The beginning was Connie Perry herself, and the years that led her to that bed, and the choices she made that put her in a single wide at the end of a fire road in the most remote corner of Fannin County, with a belly full of a baby that was only half hers. Fannin County sits in the far northeastern corner of Georgia, pressed against the Tennessee and North Carolina borders by the southern reach of the Blue Ridge Mountains. The county seat is a town called Blue Ridge, population around 1,200 in 1992, and it sits in a valley where the Toccoa River bends south toward Blue Ridge Lake. The town itself is quiet and decent, the kind of place where the hardware store owner knows your truck by the sound of the engine and the woman at the post office asks about your wife by name. But the town is a small clearing in a vast sea of forest. The Chattahoochee National Forest covers most of the county, and beyond the maintained roads, the terrain climbs steeply into ridges thick with white oak, chestnut oak, hickory, and tulip poplar, cut by creek drainages choked with rhododendron and mountain laurel, so dense you cannot see 10 feet into the understory. Black bears are common. Timber rattlesnakes den in the rock outcrops on the south-facing slopes. Copperheads live in the creek bottoms. Bobcats, coyotes, wild turkeys, white-tailed deer in numbers that would stagger a flatlander. The forest is alive, and it is deep, and it does not end. It goes north into the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, and east into the Nantahala in North Carolina, and for hundreds of miles in every direction, there is nothing but mountains and timber and the things that live in them. I came to Fannin County straight out of residency. I had done my medical training in Augusta and my residency in Macon, and I was 28 years old and newly married to a woman named Doris who had grown up in Ellijay, about 30 miles south. Doris knew these mountains. She had picked up on an opening left by a retiring physician named Dr. Roy Henderson, who had practiced in Blue Ridge for over 30 years and was willing to sell me his patient list and his office lease for a price I could manage with a federal rural health service loan. The office was a converted clapboard house on East Main Street with 2 exam rooms, a reception area, and a storage closet that I turned into a lab. Doris ran the front desk and did the billing and answered the phone, and between the two of us, we kept that practice going for 4 decades. I want you to understand what kind of doctor I was, because it matters for what comes later. I was not a researcher. I was not affiliated with a university or a hospital system or any institution that expected me to publish papers or pursue grant funding. I was a country doctor. I saw patients with sinus infections and sprained ankles and diabetes and high blood pressure and the slow accumulation of damage that hard living in a mountain economy produces in a body over 60 or 70 years. I delivered babies and pronounced deaths and everything in between. And I kept confidences. That was the foundation of everything. In a community that small, where everybody knows everybody and gossip travels faster than the speed of sound, the doctor is the person who knows the truth and keeps it locked away. I knew who drank too much. I knew who hit their wife. I knew whose blood sugar was going to kill them if they did not change their habits. And I knew they were not going to change their habits, and I treated them anyway. I kept every secret I was given for 41 years, and the people of Fannin County trusted me because of it. That trust is the reason Connie Perry called me on the night of March 12th, 1992. She called because she needed a doctor she could trust, with a secret that would have destroyed her life and the life of everyone she loved if it reached the wrong ears. She called me because a woman named Hazel Owens, who lived about 6 miles down the ridge from Connie's trailer, told her that Dr. Bell was a man who knew how to keep his mouth shut. Hazel Owens was 71 years old in 1992, a widow who lived alone on a small plot at the end of Owens Hollow Road with 6 laying hens, a wood stove, and a party line telephone that she shared with 2 other households. I had been treating Hazel for arthritis and mild hypertension since 1978. She was a tough, wiry woman who had buried a husband and 2 sons and kept going with the kind of stubbornness that mountain women develop through practice rather than philosophy. She called my office at about 10:15 on the night of the 12th. Doris answered. Hazel said there was a young woman up the mountain from her who was in labor and could not get to the hospital and needed a doctor to come to her. I took the call. I asked Hazel the standard questions. How far along was the woman? How close were the contractions? Had her water broken? Hazel said she did not know the answers to any of those questions. She said the woman had come to her house that afternoon on foot in the rain and asked if Hazel knew a doctor who could come to her when the time came. Hazel said the woman was young, maybe mid-20s, very pregnant, and living in a trailer on an old logging road about 6 miles past where the county road ended. Hazel said she had never seen the woman before that afternoon, but the woman knew Hazel's name and knew she lived alone, which meant somebody had told her about Hazel, and that meant the woman was connected to the mountain community, even if Hazel did not know her personally. I asked Hazel if the woman had a phone. Hazel said she did not. I asked if the woman had transportation. Hazel said she had not seen a vehicle. I asked Hazel how the woman had gotten to her house, if she lived 6 miles up the mountain with no car. Hazel was quiet for a moment and then said, Frank, she walked. In her condition, she walked 6 miles down that ridge in the rain, and she was not even breathing hard when she got here. That detail stayed with me. I filed it alongside the other unusual pieces and moved on to logistics. I told Hazel to call me the moment the woman contacted her again, and I began assembling my house call delivery kit. I had done enough home births to keep one ready at all times. sterile gloves, hemostats, cord clamps, bulb syringe, sterile scissors, Pitocin for postpartum hemorrhage, IV supplies, a portable Doppler for fetal heart tones, clean towels, a blood pressure cuff, my stethoscope, and a headlamp in case the power situation at the trailer was what I suspected it would be. 2 weeks passed. Then Hazel called again at about 9:45 on the night of March 26th. She said the woman had come back down the mountain that afternoon and told Hazel it would be soon. Maybe tonight, maybe the next night. The woman asked Hazel to call me when she gave the word. Hazel said the woman had then walked back up the mountain, 6 miles uphill, in the late afternoon light, and had moved through the woods with an ease that made Hazel, who had lived in those mountains her entire life, stop and watch from her porch until the woman disappeared into the tree line. The word came 14 nights later, April 9th, 1992. Hazel called at 11:20. She said the woman had come to her door 10 minutes earlier, said the contractions had started, and asked Hazel to call the doctor. I grabbed my kit, kissed Doris, who was already half asleep, and drove. The drive from my house in Blue Ridge to Hazel Owens's place took about 40 minutes on a good night. This was not a good night. A spring rain had been falling since afternoon, and the county roads north of town were slick with red clay runoff. Past the last subdivision, the pavement turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt, and the dirt turned to a single-lane track that wound up the side of Flat Top Mountain through a corridor of hardwood forest, so thick the headlights only reached about 30 feet before the trees swallowed them. I passed Hazel's place without stopping. She had given me directions beyond her house, up a Forest Service road that branched off the county track about a mile past her property. The Forest Service road was worse than the county track. Ruts deep enough to catch an axle, water running across the surface in braided channels, the undergrowth pressing in on both sides until branches were scraping the doors of my truck. I drove for about 20 minutes, climbing steadily. The rain intensified. Twice I had to stop and clear fallen branches from the road. My truck, a 1988 Chevrolet Silverado with 4-wheel drive and a toolbox in the bed, was the right vehicle for this kind of work. I had learned early in my career that a country doctor's truck was as important as his stethoscope. At the end of the Forest Service road, where the gravel gave out entirely and the track became 2 tire ruts in mud, I saw the trailer. It sat in a small clearing, maybe half an acre, surrounded on 3 sides by old-growth hardwood. A single-wide, probably early 1970s manufacture, with a corrugated metal roof that had been patched in several places, with sheets of different colored tin. No power lines ran to it, no satellite dish, no vehicle parked outside. There was a woodpile under a tarp near the front steps, and a 5-gallon bucket catching rainwater off a downspout, and light glowing behind a window covered with a thin curtain. Kerosene from the color of it. I parked about 30 feet from the trailer and sat in my truck for a moment with the engine running. The rain hammered on the roof of the cab. The headlights lit up the clearing and the trees beyond. And I noticed 2 things that I didn't understand at the time but would understand very soon. The first was the smell. Even through the closed windows of the truck, even through the rain and the mud and the scent of wet forest, I caught an odor that was foreign to anything in my experience. Heavy, musky, organic, like the concentrated essence of a large, warm body, but with an undertone of earth and bark and something mineral that I could not place. It was not unpleasant, it was potent. It filled the cab of the truck the way a strong cologne fills an elevator, and I rolled my window down an inch to test whether it was stronger outside. It was. The second thing was the ground around the trailer. In the mud, illuminated by my headlights, I could see footprints. Some were clearly from boots, small boots, a woman's size. But alongside them, overlapping them, Moving in parallel paths between the trailer and the tree line were other prints, barefoot, broad. I estimated them at 17 or 18 inches long, pressed deep into the soft ground by a weight that was hard to reconcile with any person I had ever treated. I got out of the truck. The rain hit my jacket and my hat, and the smell hit me full force, and the forest around the clearing was dark in a way that felt occupied. I do not mean haunted, I mean occupied. The way a room feels different when someone is standing behind you, even if you cannot see them. The trees were full of that presence, that density of attention, and my body registered it before my mind did. The hair on my forearms stood up. My pulse climbed. I gripped my medical bag and walked to the trailer. The front steps were 2 cinder blocks stacked under a plywood platform. I climbed them. The trailer door was a hollow-core interior door, not the original, hung with mismatched hinges. I knocked. From inside, a voice, strained, tight with pain, said, "It is open." I pushed the door inward and stepped into the trailer, and the heat hit me first. The interior was easily 90 degrees, far beyond what the small wood stove in the corner could have produced. The air was thick with moisture, and that musky odor concentrated now to a degree that made my eyes water. The kerosene lamp on the kitchen counter cast a warm yellow light over a space that was spare and clean. A table with 1 chair, a shelf of canned goods, a sink with a hand pump, clothes hanging from nails on the wall, and at the far end of the trailer, against the back wall, a bed. Connie Perry was on that bed. She was young, mid-20s, with dark hair that clung to her face with sweat. She was wearing a cotton nightgown that had ridden up over her belly, which was enormous. She was propped against 2 pillows, her knees drawn up, her right hand white-knuckled on the iron bed rail, and her left hand was extended to the far side of the bed, fingers interlocked with fingers that were not hers. I stopped in the doorway. I stopped because what I was seeing required my brain to perform calculations it was not equipped for, and while those calculations were running, my body simply refused to move. The hand holding Connie's was dark, covered in dense hair the color of black coffee, and each finger was as thick as a broom handle. The hand was connected to a wrist wider than my calf, which was connected to a forearm the circumference of a fence post, which disappeared behind the bed frame into a massive shadow on the far side of the bed, where a shape sat on the floor with its back against the trailer wall. It was too large for the space. Its shoulders, if I had been able to see them clearly, would have been wider than the bed frame. Its head, which I could see above the mattress line, was massive, with a heavy brow that cast its eyes into shadow, and dark hair that covered the scalp and the sides of the face, and continued down the neck and across the shoulders. It was watching me, not with aggression, not with the blank stare of an animal evaluating a threat, with concern, with the focused, intelligent worry of someone whose loved one is in pain and who is looking at the person who might be able to help. Connie opened her eyes. She looked at me. She said, "You must be Dr. Bell. Hazel said you would come." Then a contraction hit, and her face locked, and her grip tightened on the iron rail and on those dark fingers, and the thing sitting on the floor made a sound, low, deep, continuous, like a diesel engine dropped 2 octaves and given the cadence of a lullaby. The sound filled the trailer. I felt it in my back teeth. And Connie, in the grip of that contraction, with sweat running into her eyes and her body doing the hardest work a body can do, relaxed. Not completely, but measurably. The sound was doing something to her pain that I could not explain with any pharmacological framework I possessed. I had a decision to make, and I had about 3 seconds to make it. I could turn around, walk out of that trailer, drive back to Blue Ridge, and pretend I had never come. Or I could do what I had driven 40 miles in the rain to do, which was deliver a baby. I set my bag on the table, washed my hands in the basin of water that was steaming on the wood stove, pulled on my gloves, and said, "I am Dr. Bell. How far apart are the contractions?" Connie said, "About 4 minutes." I examined her. She was fully dilated and the baby was crowning. There was no time for anything except the work. I positioned myself at the foot of the bed, adjusted the kerosene lamp so I could see, and I began the process that I had performed over 2,000 times in rooms that were nothing like this one and yet exactly like this one, because the mechanics of birth do not change regardless of the circumstances surrounding them. I will tell you what I did not do during that delivery. I did not look at the shape on the floor, not directly. I kept it at the periphery of my vision the way you keep a hot stove in your peripheral awareness when you are cooking, knowing it is there, respecting the danger, not engaging with it because the task in front of you demands everything you have. I am not a brave man. I am a competent man, and competence, when you have practiced it long enough, becomes its own form of courage. My hands knew what to do. My hands had delivered babies in worse conditions than this. My hands did not care what was sitting on the other side of the bed. They cared about the baby. The baby came at 12:17 in the morning, April 10th, 1992. A boy. He came fast once crowning was established, faster than most deliveries, and I caught him with both hands, and he was heavy. Not just big, heavy. Dense in a way that made me adjust my grip, the way you adjust when you pick up a rock that weighs more than it looks like it should. He was slippery with amniotic fluid and blood, and his skin was dark, a deep olive brown, and he was covered in fine hair that was denser than normal newborn lanugo, especially across the shoulders and down the back. His head was large relative to his body, with a brow ridge that cast a shadow I could see even in the lamplight. His hands were broad, with fingers that were thick and strong, and when I cleared his airway with the bulb syringe and he took his first breath, the sound he made was not a cry. It was a tone, a low, short, rumbling tone that vibrated in my hands as I held him, a sound that a newborn human throat should not be capable of producing. The pitch was too low, the depth too great, the duration too controlled. And from the floor on the far side of the bed, the shape answered. The same pitch, the same rumbling depth, but longer and softer, like an echo that had learned tenderness. I felt that answering tone in my sternum, in my ribs, in the fillings in my teeth. I clamped the cord. I cut it. I wrapped the baby in a clean towel I had brought and placed him on Connie's chest. She drew him to her with both arms, her right hand finally releasing the bed rail, her left hand still holding those dark fingers. The baby settled against her body and fell silent, and Connie looked down at him with an expression I had seen 1,000 times on 1,000 mothers' faces, an expression so universal and so specific that it has no name because it does not need one. Then she looked at the shape beside the bed and said a word, not an English word, a vocalization, a single tonal syllable that rose and fell and carried with it an emotion I did not need a translator to understand. She was telling him, she was telling the father that the child was here and alive and whole. The response was movement. The shape shifted, and for the first time I saw it clearly, because it leaned forward into the lamplight to look at the child, and the lamplight showed me everything. He was tall, even sitting down. If he had stood in that trailer with its 7-foot ceiling, he would have had to stoop. His shoulders were as wide as the doorway I had walked through. His chest was deep and barrel-shaped, covered in dense dark hair that was nearly black across the torso and lighter, a dark chestnut, on the arms and the sides of the face. The face. I am going to describe it as precisely as I can, because I looked at that face for a long time and I owe it accuracy. The brow was heavy, a pronounced ridge of bone that overhung the eye sockets and cast the eyes into permanent shadow. The nose was wide and flat, with nostrils that flared as he breathed. The jaw was broad and heavy, with a chin that was less pronounced than a human chin, but still present. The mouth was wide, the lips thinner than a human's, but expressive, and the eyes, set deep under that brow, brown, flecked with amber, reflecting the kerosene light with a faint reddish sheen. Those eyes were not the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of a parent seeing his child for the first time. He reached out with the hand that was not holding Connie's. One finger extended, the index finger, which was as long as my hand from wrist to fingertip. He touched the baby's head, gently, with a control over the force in that massive hand that spoke to intelligence, to awareness of his own size relative to the fragility of what he was touching. He ran that finger across the baby's scalp, through the fine dark hair, and he made a sound that I do not have adequate language for. It was soft, it was low, it might have been the quietest sound that body was capable of producing, and it communicated across every barrier of species and language and the framework of reality itself, the same thing that every father's first touch communicates. I am here. You are mine. I will not let anything in this world hurt you. I sat on the edge of the bed with a placenta to deliver and vital signs to check and medical protocols to follow, and I did nothing for close to 30 seconds. I did nothing because I was watching a father meet his son, and the clinical part of my brain had gone silent, overwhelmed by the human part, the part that recognized what it was seeing, regardless of the impossible context. Then the clinical brain came back, because that is what training does, and I went to work. I delivered the placenta, which was larger and thicker than any I had seen, veined with blood vessels that were more prominent than normal. I checked Connie's vitals. Blood pressure 112/68, pulse 60, temperature 101.2. The temperature gave me pause, but the woman had just delivered a baby in a trailer that was 90 degrees and fever was not unexpected. I examined the baby. Weight, estimated without a scale by the feel in my hands and arms, was close to 12 pounds. His color was good. His breathing was strong and steady. His APGAR scores, had I been scoring formally, would have been high. His grip, when I tested the palmar reflex by placing my finger against his palm, was powerful enough that I had to use my other hand to free myself. His skin temperature was noticeably elevated. I estimated over 103 degrees by touch alone. His heart rate was the first number that broke from expected range. I placed my stethoscope on his chest and counted. 88 beats per minute. Normal newborn heart rate ranges from 110 to 160. This baby's heart was beating nearly 30% slower than the bottom of normal range, and each beat registered through the stethoscope with a force that startled me. Strong, slow, steady, like the engine of something built to last. I looked at Connie. She was watching me examine her son with the calm, evaluative gaze of a mother who already knew that her child was different and was waiting to see whether the doctor would handle that difference with grace or with alarm. I chose grace. I told her that the baby appeared healthy and that his vital signs were strong. I told her he was large and that his heart rate was on the low side, but not concerning given the circumstances. I told her she had done well and that the delivery had been textbook. I did not mention the bone density I could feel in his limbs when I examined his extremities, the unusual weight distribution, the body hair, or the heart rate in specific terms that would have required me to explain why I was not alarmed by a number that should have sent me reaching for the phone to call an ambulance. Then I said, "I need to ask you some questions, Connie. Not tonight. You need to rest. But I am going to come back, and when I do, I need you to tell me the truth about what I am looking at." She nodded. She said, "I will. But you should know that I am not going to apologize for any of it." I packed my kit. I washed my hands. And then, because I am a doctor and because a doctor looks at the whole patient, I turned and looked fully and directly at the father of that child for the first time since I had entered the trailer. He was looking at me. His head was tilted slightly, the way a person tilts their head when they are listening carefully to someone they are not sure about. He was still seated on the floor, his knees drawn up, one hand resting on his knee and the other still holding Connie's. In the lamplight, in the close quarters of that trailer, the scale of him was staggering. The hand on his knee was wider than a dinner plate. The knee itself was level with the top of the mattress. His breathing was slow, deep, regular, and I could hear it, a low rhythmic draw and release that seemed to pull air from the entire room. I said, "Your wife and son are healthy. The delivery went well. They need rest." He blinked. The movement was slow, measured, and in the moment between blink and reopening, I saw his expression shift. Just slightly, just enough. The worry eased. The tension in the set of his jaw softened. He understood me. Whether he understood the words or the tone or both, I could not tell, but the comprehension was real and it was clear. I walked out of that trailer into the rain. The forest around the clearing was not silent. From multiple directions, at varying distances, I could hear them. Low vocalizations, continuous and rhythmic, moving through the trees the way sound moves through a cathedral. The sounds rose and fell in patterns that were too complex for random animal calls and too structured for coincidence. There were at least 4 distinct sources, maybe more, and they were communicating. The sounds were moving around the clearing in what I can only describe as a perimeter, and the quality of the vocalizations had changed from the deep, continuous tone I had heard from the father inside the trailer. These were higher, more varied, and they carried, if I am honest about what my gut was telling me, excitement. The sound of a community receiving news. I stood in the rain beside my truck, and I listened, and I understood that the trailer in the clearing was not isolated. The woman inside was not alone in any way that mattered. She had a partner and a community and a network of beings in the forest around her who were aware of what had happened tonight and who cared. I drove home. The rain had slackened to a mist, and the fire road was marginally less treacherous on the way down. I pulled into my driveway at 2:15 in the morning. Doris was asleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights off and a glass of water I did not drink, and I thought about what I had just witnessed. And I thought about the oath I had taken 20 years earlier to do no harm, and I thought about what harm might look like in a situation that no oath had ever been written to address. I did not sleep. At dawn, I drove to my office and locked myself inside before Doris arrived. I wrote my notes. I recorded every measurement, every observation, every detail I could remember. I wrote them in a small leather journal that I placed in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath a stack of old insurance forms, and I locked the drawer. Those notes would stay in that drawer for the next 33 years. I went back to the trailer 1 week later. The road was dry this time, the April sun cutting through the canopy in shafts that lit up the new growth on the rhododendron and the mountain laurel. Dogwoods were blooming in the understory, white against the green, and the air smelled like spring in the mountains, which is a smell composed of wet earth, leaf mold, pollen, and the sweetness of things coming back to life. Connie was on the porch, a platform of rough-cut lumber someone had built from locust posts and wooden pegs, no nails anywhere in the construction. Tools leaned against the trailer's skirting. A stone blade lashed to a wooden handle. A scraping tool made from what appeared to be a large flat bone, its edge worn smooth from use. Connie was nursing the baby. She looked stronger than she had on the night of the delivery. Her color was high, her eyes were clear, and she watched me park and walk toward the trailer without surprise. She said, "I heard your engine about 10 minutes ago." He heard it before I did. I asked where he was. She glanced toward the tree line on the north side of the clearing. "Close. He will not come out while you are here. He made an exception the night of the birth because I asked. But the rule is that he stays in the trees when other people are near. I sat in the one chair on the porch and looked at the baby. He was 1 week old and already larger than he should have been. His face in the daylight showed the features I had noted more clearly: the heavy brow, the wide nose, the broad jaw, but also his mother's mouth, her cheekbones, the shape of her ears, a blend that was arresting to look at, contained both parents and was diminished by neither. I asked Connie to tell me everything. She took a long breath and looked out at the forest and began. Connie Perry was born in 1965 in Epworth, about 15 miles northeast of Blue Ridge. Her father, Floyd Perry, worked for the Forest Service as a timber surveyor, walking the boundaries of federal land and marking trees for selective harvest. Her mother, Opal, raised Connie and her 2 brothers in a house on Hemptown Creek Road. Connie grew up in those woods the way children in that part of Georgia did in the 70s, barefoot from April to October, hunting squirrels with a single-shot .22, fishing for brook trout in headwater creeks where the water made your hands ache. Her father taught her the forest not as recreation but as literacy. Every track and broken branch, a sentence in a story that was always being told. It was during those trips with her father that she first became aware that the forest contained something he acknowledged but never named. She was 13, October of 1978. They were surveying old-growth hemlock in the upper Jacks River drainage, camped overnight near the creek, and Connie woke before dawn to find her father standing at the edge of the firelight, listening. From the ridge above came a vocalization, deep, unbroken, moving south through the drainage with a speed that suggested whatever produced it was covering ground fast. A second vocalization answered from the opposite ridge, higher but similar in structure, and the 2 sounds overlapped and then separated and faded. Her father sat back down and said nothing. She pressed him. He poked the fire with a stick and said, "There are things in these mountains that have been here longer than us. They keep to themselves, and we keep to ourselves, and that is how it works." He said it with a finality that ended the conversation, but also with a respect that told her this was not dismissal. It was acknowledgement. Over the following years, Connie accumulated her own evidence. Tracks in the mud along the upper Tocoa, bare footprints too large for any human. Tree structures in deep ravines off Stanley Creek, saplings twisted into frames that matched no construction she had ever seen. A bone-scraping tool beside a deer carcass, butchered with a precision no known predator could achieve. The hide removed in one piece, the meat taken, the bones cracked for marrow. She told nobody. Her father had established the protocol. You notice, you respect, you keep quiet. After high school, she worked at a nursery outside Blue Ridge, propagating native plants. She was restless in town. The noise, the proximity of people, the constant hum of electricity and vehicles. In 1988, at 23, she bought the single-wide trailer from a man in Ellijay for $1,100, paid cash, and had it hauled to the clearing at the end of the fire road. She set up the wood stove, dug a privy, and began living alone in the mountains. The first direct encounter happened in the spring of 1989, about 6 months after she moved in. She was sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the light fade, and she smelled it. That heavy, musky scent, building from faint to strong over 5 minutes. She sat still. She did not go inside. She did not reach for the rifle beside the door. She waited, and the waiting felt like the most natural thing she had ever done, as if she had been preparing for it since she was 13. He came to the edge of the clearing, not into it. He stood between 2 large oaks about 60 yards from the porch, motionless except for the slow rise and fall of his breathing. She could see his outline against the lighter bark of the oak behind him, tall and wider than the trunk, and the last of the daylight showed her the shape of shoulders that were easily 4 feet across and a head that turned slightly as she breathed. Tracking her the way a person tracks a conversation they are deciding whether to enter. He stood for perhaps 10 minutes. She could hear his breathing from 60 yards away, slow and deep, and she could smell him, that heavy, musky scent, soaking into the evening air until it was all she could taste on her tongue. Then he stepped back into the forest, a single, smooth motion that carried him from visibility to nothing in less than a second, and the clearing was empty again. He came back the next evening, and the next. For 3 weeks he appeared at the tree line at dusk and stood and watched and left. Connie began leaving food on a flat rock at the edge of the clearing, apples from a tree on Hazel Owens's property, cornbread, a can of sardines. The food was always gone by morning. On the 23rd night, the exchange changed. In place of the food she had left, Connie found a bundle of ramps, wild leeks, their roots still caked with mountain soil, tied with a strip of tulip poplar bark. She picked them up and held them, and she smelled the dirt on the roots, and she understood what she was holding: a trade, a gift for a gift, an act that implied intelligence, awareness, and intent. She said she sat on the flat rock beside those ramps and cried, not from fear, but from the overwhelming recognition that she was in the presence of something that understood the concept of reciprocity, something that had watched her for weeks, assessed her, and chosen to participate in the oldest form of communication between two beings who cannot speak each other's language. Here I have something you need. There you have something I want. Let us share. She went back every evening after that. The distance closed over months. The encounters moved from the tree line to the clearing, from dusk to daylight, from silence to sound. She learned that his vocalizations carried specific, repeatable meaning. A low hum meant acknowledgement. A rising tone meant curiosity. She learned his habits. He slept during the warmest part of the day in a nest of woven branches about a quarter mile up the ridge. He hunted at dawn and dusk, taking deer with a speed and efficiency that was the most impressive display of physical ability she had ever seen. He could close on a deer from 30 yards in what she estimated was less than 3 seconds, the kill instantaneous. He processed the carcass with stone tools from a hide pouch slung over one shoulder, and he brought portions of the meat to the flat rock for Connie without being asked, the way you bring dinner to someone who lives in your house, because feeding them is simply what you do. The relationship deepened in the second year. Connie told me this directly, without embarrassment. She said it was gradual, consensual, and fully understood on her part. She said she loved him. She used that word without qualification. She said the love had grown the way love grows between two beings who spend time together, who provide for each other, who sit in silence and find that the silence is enough. She said the fact that he was not human did not make the love less real. It made it different. But the core of it, the care, the protectiveness, the willingness to be vulnerable, was identical to the love she had observed between her parents. She became pregnant in the summer of 1991. She had not thought it possible, she told me. The distance between their kinds seemed too great. But the body does not consult the intellect before it does what it does. And when the nausea started in August and her period did not come in September, she knew what had happened before any test could confirm it. She said her body knew. Not just the symptoms, but a deeper knowing, a recognition that something new was taking shape inside her, that was connected to both of them, and that this new thing was going to change everything. The pregnancy was hard. By the 4th month, she was gaining weight and muscle mass at a rate that frightened her. Her shoulders broadened, her hands grew stronger. She could hear things she had never heard before. Her body temperature climbed until she was comfortable outside in January. in a cotton dress. The baby moved with a force that left bruises visible from the outside. She could not see a doctor. Any examination would have revealed anomalies she could not explain without explaining him, and explaining him would have meant losing everything. So she endured the pregnancy with his help. He brought her specific plants during the worst nausea, roots and barks. She brewed into teas following his gestural instructions. He reinforced the trailer against winter. He sat with her on the porch with his hand on her belly, and when the baby kicked, he would respond with a soft vocalization that felt like a conversation she could only physically participate in. In March, when the contractions started, she walked 6 miles down the mountain in the rain to Hazel's house and asked her to call a doctor. Then she walked back up. He met her on the trail about 2 miles from the trailer and walked beside her the rest of the way, his hand hovering near her back. She told me the sounds he made during that walk were continuous and rhythmic and low. They sounded like worry. She told me the decision to have him present for the birth was not impulsive. She had thought about it for weeks. She could not ask him to wait outside while his child was being born. He had earned the right to be there. I told Connie that her secret was safe. I told her I would continue to provide medical care for her and for the baby. I told her I would not report what I had seen to anyone. And I told her, because I felt it was important, that what I had witnessed in that trailer was not something I intended to judge. I was her doctor. My job was to keep her and her child healthy. She cried, briefly, quietly. Then she wiped her eyes and said, "His name is Eli. I named him after my grandfather, Eli Perry. He was the one who built the house on Hemptown Creek. He would have understood this." I asked her what she called the father. She said she called him by a vocalization she could not perfectly replicate, but the closest English approximation was a sound like "g," a deep, rumbling syllable that meant something close to "he who remains." I checked Eli's vitals. Heart rate 86, temperature 103.4, weight, by the portable scale I had brought, 12 pounds 4 ounces at 1 week old. All numbers that would be flagged in any hospital and that I recorded in my private journal with the same careful notation I applied to every patient. I told Connie I would come back in 2 weeks. As I drove out, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a shape step out of the tree line and walk toward the trailer. Tall, dark, moving with a rolling gait that covered the distance in a few strides. He went inside. The door closed behind him. Doris asked me how the house call had gone. I told her the mother and baby were doing well. She did not press. She had been a doctor's wife long enough to know that not pressing was part of the job. Over the following months, Eli grew at a rate that no pediatric growth chart could accommodate. By 4 weeks, the size of a typical 3-month-old. By 8 weeks, sitting unsupported. By 12 weeks, pulling himself to standing using the bed frame. His vocalizations developed in parallel. Certain tones meant hunger, others meant discomfort. Others seemed directed at the tree line, and when Eli produced those sounds, there was sometimes an answer from the forest. Acknowledgement, connection, a parent speaking to a child in a language that predated every human tongue. His physical characteristics became more pronounced as he grew. The brow ridge, the body hair thickening across his shoulders and back, his hands broad and powerful, his grip strength staggering. By 6 months, he could grip a wooden dowel with enough force that I could lift him off the ground by it. His body temperature held between 102 and 104 degrees. His resting heart rate stayed in the low 80s. He was healthy. Whatever combination of biology was operating inside that small, dense, warm body, it was working. His immune system was a fortress. He caught no infections, developed no fevers beyond his baseline. He ate voraciously, and by 4 months was supplementing nursing with pieces of cooked meat that Connie chewed to softness before giving to him. At 7 months, Eli walked, not the wobbling first steps of a toddler, purposeful, balanced, ground-covering walking with a gait that was wider and lower than a human child's. Connie said the first time he walked across the trailer floor unassisted, she laughed and clapped and made a sound that was half joy and half the tonal language she had learned from his father. Eli turned and looked at her and grinned, a wide, unself-conscious grin that showed teeth that were already larger than they should have been for his age. And he walked back to her and put his broad little hands on her knees and made a low sound she understood as pride. By his first birthday in April of 1993, he was 38 inches tall and over 40 pounds, running and climbing the forest around the trailer with confidence that exceeded children twice his chronological age. His feet gripped uneven ground with a stability hiking boots could not match. He could move through the forest in near total darkness. He was meeting his father. Connie described the first encounter she witnessed when Eli was about 4 months old. She carried him to the clearing's edge at dusk. The father came closer than his usual distance. Eli produced a complex vocalization, rising and falling and modulated. The father answered with the same pattern, and something passed between them that Connie said she could feel but not explain. Recognition, a bond activating. By the time Eli was walking, these encounters were daily. Eli would walk to him and they would disappear into the forest together for hours. Connie allowed this. It required a faith she did not know she possessed, to watch her 7-month-old walk into the trees with a being who could crush a deer's neck with one hand. But Eli always came back, always calm, always content, carrying evidence of time spent with a parent who was teaching him the things that parent knew. In September of 1993, Connie told me she was pregnant again. I delivered the second child, a girl, in June of 1994. Connie named her June after her mother. June was 11 pounds at birth, with the same features, the same slow, powerful heartbeat, the same first vocalization answered from outside by her father. June was smaller than Eli, and her features leaned more toward Connie's side. Her brow was less prominent. Her body hair was finer. I delivered 5 children for Connie Perry. Eli in 92, June in 94, Dale in 96, Opal in 98, Faye in 2000. 5 children in 8 years, each born in the same trailer, each delivered by my hands, each carrying the inheritance of a father who sat in the forest outside and sang them into the world. The children were all different, and the differences taught me more about genetics than any textbook. Eli was the most physically imposing. Dale was similar in build but lighter in coloring, with tawny brown hair. June and Opal were smaller, closer to human proportions, and Faye, the youngest, was the most human-presenting of all, small, fine-boned relative to her siblings, with body hair so light it was barely visible. But all 5 shared the core traits: the elevated temperature, the slow, powerful heartbeat, the grip strength, the accelerated development, the tonal communication with their father and with each other, and the pull toward the forest. Connie raised them alone during daylight and with the father at night and in the early mornings. She taught them to read using library books from Blue Ridge. She taught them arithmetic and history. The father taught them the rest: how to move through the forest without sound, how to read weather by the behavior of birds, how to identify every large predator within miles by scent and track. He taught them his language, which the children spoke with a fluency Connie could not match, their throats capable of frequencies her human vocal apparatus could not replicate. In the spring of 2001, the arrangement was threatened. A timber survey crew cut a new access road within a mile of the trailer. A crew member found tracks in the mud along a seasonal creek and reported them as bear. His crew leader, a 30-year veteran named Carl Henderson, looked at those tracks and said nothing, because Carl Henderson knew what bear tracks looked like, and these were not bear tracks. He radioed the Forest Service District Office in Blue Ridge and recommended the access road be discontinued after the survey was complete. Another crew member working late on the ridgeline above Connie's clearing heard vocalizations at dusk. Low, continuous, patterned. He told his crewmates it sounded like someone talking in a language made entirely of bass notes. They laughed and said it was probably elk, though there were no elk in the North Georgia mountains in 2001. The elk reintroduction to the southern Appalachians would not begin until the following year, and then only in the Smokies, 70 miles northeast. I learned about the crew from Hazel Owens. Connie moved the children to a camp 4 miles deeper in the forest until the crew was gone. The access road was abandoned and overgrown within months, but the incident forced a conversation Connie and I had been avoiding. The children were getting older. Eli was 9, the size of a 16-year-old, spending more time in the forest than in the trailer. The infrastructure of secrecy was becoming inadequate for children growing faster than it could accommodate. I asked Connie what her long-term plan was. She said, "They will choose. When they are old enough, they will choose which world they belong to. I will not make that choice for them." The choices emerged over the following years. Eli, by 12, was spending most of his time in the forest with his father and the wider community that Connie estimated at between 8 and 15 individuals across roughly 60 square miles. He was over 6 feet tall, weighed over 200 pounds, and his body hair had thickened to the point where he was indistinguishable from his father at a distance. He still spoke English to his mother, but his primary language was the tonal system of the forest. June went the other direction. She was curious about the world below the mountain. Connie began taking her on careful trips to Blue Ridge, long sleeves and pants covering the body hair, the library, the grocery store. June adapted fast. She learned to modulate her physical capabilities to avoid attention, learned that when a man struggled with a 50-pound bag of concrete, you did not pick it up one-handed and carry it to his truck, even though you could. In 2008, Faye, the youngest and most human-presenting, was enrolled in school. I helped with the documentation, birth certificate, immunization records, a home address using Hazel Owens's property. Hazel, who by then was 87 and fully aware of the truth, was delighted to help. Faye attended Fannin County Middle School and then Fannin County High School, where she was a normal student by every metric, a little tall, a little quiet. A body temperature the school nurse flagged once as a low-grade fever. Her grades were good. Her test scores were exceptional, particularly in math and science. She joined the cross-country team and had to learn to run slower than she was capable of, which she described to Connie as the hardest part of being in the human world. Faye graduated as valedictorian in 2012. She gave a speech about the importance of roots and the courage it takes to grow in 2 directions at once, and nobody in the audience understood the full meaning except Connie and me. What happened to the family over the following years is a story still unfolding. Eli left the trailer in 2003 and walked into the forest with his father and did not come back to stay. Connie heard from him periodically. He would come to the clearing at dusk and vocalize, and she would stand with him and he would tell her in the tonal language that he was well, that he was learning the deep patterns of the forest. She said his voice had deepened until it was nearly identical to his father's. June married a man from Blue Ridge named Scott Cook, a mechanic at the Chevrolet dealership. Scott was quiet and steady and asked few questions. June told him enough for him to understand her family was different, and Scott's response was to shrug and say everybody's family was different, and his uncle once ate a live crawfish on a bet, so he was not in a position to judge. They had 2 children who were healthy and strong and ran warm and healed fast and liked the woods more than the playground. Dale built a cabin 2 miles from Connie's trailer and lived there alone, working occasional construction and timber jobs. At 6'4" and over 260 pounds, he drew some attention, but Fannin County is a place where large, quiet men who live alone in the mountains are not unusual enough to investigate. Opal became a veterinary technician. She worked at the animal clinic on Appalachian Highway in Blue Ridge, where her instinct for animal behavior was uncanny. She could calm a terrified dog with a vocalization the veterinarian described as the most effective sedation technique he had ever seen without medication. Faye went to the University of Georgia, studied biology, and came home to work for the Forest Service, doing wildlife surveys in the Chattahoochee. She was assigned to the same territory her grandfather, Floyd Perry, had surveyed 40 years earlier, walking the same ridges, knowing with every step that the forest around her contained her father and her brother, and the community that had existed in those mountains since before any human record. Faye called me 6 months ago and told me it was time to tell this story. She said genetic studies in the Pacific Northwest were beginning to document anomalous hominid DNA in human populations, and it was only a matter of time before someone looked at the southern Appalachians. She wanted the story told by someone who had been there. Connie is still alive. She is 60 years old, still in the trailer, which has been modified so many times it barely resembles the structure I entered in '92. She runs warm. She heals fast. The changes the first pregnancy began in her body never fully reversed. At 60, she moves through those mountains with an ease women half her age would envy. She still hears the vocalizations at dusk. She still stands on the porch and listens. Sometimes she answers. The father is still there. I know because I saw him once in the fall of 2019. I was 73, my knees complaining about the fire road, and I had driven up to check on Connie after a bout of bronchitis. The checkup was routine. I was walking back to my truck in the late afternoon when I stopped at the edge of the clearing to catch my breath. The light was golden, October light in the mountains when the hardwoods are turning and the sun comes through the canopy at a low angle and everything glows. He was standing about 50 yards up the slope between 2 white oaks, partially obscured by a trunk but visible enough. He was gray now. The dark hair I had seen in the lamplight 30 years earlier had gone silver across the shoulders and arms, though his posture was upright and his size was undiminished. He stood there looking at me, and I stood looking at him, and for a full minute we regarded each other across 30 yards of mountain laurel and 3 decades of shared history. He had let me deliver his children. He had trusted me with the most important thing in his life. Standing there in the golden light, I felt an acknowledgement pass between us that required no language. The quiet recognition between 2 old men that they had done their best by the people they loved, and that it had been good enough. He turned and moved up the slope into the deep timber, and the forest closed behind him, and I have not seen him since. I am 79 years old. Doris passed away in 2017. She knew the whole truth by then because I told her in 2010, sitting at our kitchen table with a glass of bourbon I did not drink, and her response was, "Frank, I have been married to you for 36 years, and I know when you are carrying something too heavy for one person. Put it down." She listened to the entire story and asked to meet Connie, and I drove them both up the fire road, and Doris and Connie sat on the porch and drank coffee and talked for 3 hours. Doris never told a soul. My journal is still in the bottom drawer of my desk. It contains records of every visit, every measurement, every observation over 23 years. Birth weights, growth charts, heart rates, temperatures, developmental milestones. The most complete medical documentation of hybrid development in existence, recorded by a country doctor in a leather-bound journal that smells like old paper and the faint residual musk of a trailer at the end of a fire road. I know that when I walked into that trailer on the night of April 9th, 1992, I saw a woman holding the hand of something that the world says does not exist. I saw her gripping those fingers through the worst pain a body can endure, and I saw the being holding her hand back with a tenderness that took apart every assumption I had about what tenderness requires. It does not require language. It does not require shared anatomy. It does not require membership in the same species. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to sit beside someone in their hardest hour and hold on. She would not let go of his hand. I delivered her son with that hand still clasped in hers, and when the baby was born and the father touched his child's head for the first time, the look on that face, that heavy-browed, deep-eyed, impossible face, was the same look I have seen on every father I have ever watched meet his child. The same disbelief, the same overwhelm, the same staggering recognition that the world has just expanded to include something you will spend the rest of your life protecting. My name is Frank Bell. I practiced medicine in the mountains of North Georgia for 41 years. I kept the secret because that is what a doctor does. I kept it because Connie trusted me and because the family she built on that mountain deserved to exist without being turned into a headline or a specimen. And I am telling it now because Faye, the valedictorian, the girl who learned to run slower than she could so the world would not suspect what she was, asked me to. The mountains are still there, the forest is still deep, and at the top of a fire road in Fannin County, in a clearing where the old-growth timber begins, and the sounds at dusk are not sounds any field guide will help you identify. There is a woman who chose love over safety, over convention, over every rule the world wrote about what a life is supposed to look like. She chose it, and she built it, and she defended it for 30 years. And the proof is 5 children who carry in their blood the evidence of 2 species that were never supposed to meet, but did. In the mountains of North Georgia, in the years when nobody was watching, I held those babies. I felt their weight. I heard their first sounds answered from the forest by a father who was never allowed to stand in the delivery room, but who stood just outside the walls and sang his children into the world anyway. And I am telling you, as a man who has spent his life in the practice of medicine and the keeping of confidences, that what lives in those mountains is real, that the woman who held its hand through the birth of their son was the bravest person I have ever known, and that the love I witnessed in that trailer, between a woman from Epworth and a being from the oldest part of the forest, was the most honest love I have seen in 79 years of watching people try. It asked for nothing. It explained nothing. It simply held on through the pain and the fear and the impossible strangeness of what they had chosen, and it did not let go. The forest is listening. It has always been listening. And now, finally, so are you.